Okay, so to get started, what you're going to do is on your desktop, you want to find the Unity Hub. And if you can't find it, you can always just search for Unity Hub. And we're going to go ahead and open up that. Okay. It'll probably give you a little window like this that says sign in. This is where you're going to sign in with your Unity account. It's going to bring you to the website, and then in here you can just sign in with your Unity account. Click sign in, and you're good to go. It should reopen the Unity Hub after you do that. It's kind of like a two-step process, right? Now, you might see other people's projects sitting on here. Don't worry about all those. There might be a history list of other student stuff. It just kind of keeps that, but it's all good. So once you see this Unity Hub, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click New Project, this little blue button right here. We're going to click New Project, and it's going to give us our project setup window. Now, the first thing we do before we create our project is at the very top right here, it says Editor Version. This is super important. So Unity is one of these engines that is constantly evolving and updating their engine to newer versions and new cycles. So they were on this cycle where it was like 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, etc., which you can see here. But more recently, in more current years, since 2024, they've gone to Unity 6 because they're just like, forget that. We're just going to ditch the year thing. So where it says new project at the top under editor version, make sure you're on 6,000 whatever, right? Any one of the 6,000s is fine. I'll use my top one here, 6,000.11 whatever. Just make sure you're in a Unity 6,000 version, okay? Now with that selected, the reason why is because they've changed a lot of the core functionality of the engine and rendering capabilities of what the engine can do. You know, they're constantly updating their renderer to get closer to engines like Unreal and things like that. And so they've built in a lot of stuff like that to help you better with rendering. So in here with editor version 6,000 something selected, below I want everybody to click Universal 3D Core. Make sure that's selected. And again, we'll just learn some basic engine stuff tonight, so I'm going to keep it in 3D, but we'll go back to 2D next week. And in here, I'm going to go project name, and I'm just going to go my test project, or my test 3D, whatever. And just set it to your desktop's fine. If you have an organization, do that. Uncheck connect to cloud. You don't need to do that. Uncheck that, and you should be good to go. So make sure your location is your desktop. You have a name for it, and uncheck cloud, connect to cloud, and then say create project. So Universal 3D Core, and create. And then it's going to open Unity and build the project. So what Unity's doing now when you do that is it's kind of installing all the different libraries that come pre-installed within Unity. Everything from animation packages to rendering packages to physics packages to all kinds of stuff that's kind of behind the scenes of the game engine. That's what this loader is doing. It's kind of creating an instance of your project and putting all of these Unity packages in there. Typically when you first create a project, it takes like probably 5 minutes to set it all up, like we're doing right here. But then subsequent times you open it, it'll be much faster because all those are pre-installed. So you can see right here, it's just adding all these scripts and things to the engine. Okay? So if you're ever wondering, you know, when you create a project in Unity, why it initially takes a while, it's because it has to do all that, the setup, right? But then if you open it again, it's a lot faster. And so tonight's just probably go for like an hour just as like a little crash course, just to kind of talk about the Unity interface and all the elements that are in here. And we'll just build something super simple and mess around with some physics and show you what the engine can do, right? And don't stress if you get lost or whatever. Like I said, this will all be recorded, and I will post this video on Canvas. So on your own time, you want to go back and watch it and go over it again, feel free. So if you fall behind or whatever, don't stress. It's all good. I got you. All right. Okay, so when we first load into Unity, we should see a setup that looks something similar to this. If it doesn't look like this or looks a little different, just go up to Window, Layouts, and then just go to Default right here. Okay, so Window, Layouts, Default right there. Okay, so we should see something very similar to this. And just to talk a little bit about what we're seeing here in Unity, this will just be kind of like a deep dive into the interface and just how to use it, right? So at first glance, in the middle here is our scene. So anything we're building in Unity is constructed within this scene view, right? And this is a 3D view of different objects that we see. Now, if you hold the Alt key on your keyboard and click and drag in here inside this window, you can orbit around your scene. Okay, by holding Alt, you can click and orbit around your scene, right? If you hold Alt and hold down the middle mouse button, or like your scroll wheel, but like click in with it, you can pan around your scene. And then your right mouse button, you can zoom in and out. Okay? So general movement done within this scene view is done by exactly that. We're orbiting, we're panning, and we're zooming in and out. Okay? Make sense? Yeah, pretty simple. All right, hold Alt, orbit, pan, zoom. All right? All while holding Alt, right? Now, in the top of this scene view, we have a couple of different things. We've got this little toolbar here, which is how you move elements within your scene. So if I click on this little camera in my scene, just by clicking on it, you'll see that it's now selected. But if I click on, let's say, the Move tool right here, I'll get these little handles around that camera, which allow me to move that camera within my scene. So I can grab a handle and move it up and down. I can move it forward and backward, and I can move it side to side. Right? So that would be the Move tool. Now, if you're wondering what this Hand tool is above it, typically this is used for when you're on your laptop. A lot of people use it if they have a trackpad or something like that. It's the same as like the Orbit tool, right? You just don't have to use the Alt key. It just kind of helps you pan and move around with that. Okay, that's all that's for. It's like a view tool, right? Okay. First is the Move tool. So you see that? And what are the axes we see on this camera, right? We've got an up and down, which is designated by this little green handle right here. We got a forward and back, which is the blue, or the Z. And then we have a side to side, which is our X. So we have Y, Z, and X, or X, Y, and Z. You can also see here this little compass in the corner kind of shows us where the different axes are. We've got our Z, we've got our X, and we've got our Y. All right? If you need to snap to a particular axis to look at something, you can just click on it here, and it'll instantly go to that particular axis. All right? So if I click Y, Z, X, I kind of bounce around to the different views on those different axes. Okay, if I hold Alt, I can now go back to a little 3D view. Right? So kind of navigating around is just like that. Right? Now, to add stuff into this scene, I'm going to go up to Game Object here at the top, Game Object in this top menu, Game Object. And don't be, there's like a lot of different menus in Unity. Don't be overwhelmed right off the bat. I'll show you like the most necessary stuff. A lot of it's kind of fluff. A lot of it you're not really going to use. But there is a lot of menus, so don't get too overwhelmed by that. It's totally fine. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a cube into our scene so we can actually kind of see what's going on, right? So I'm going to go up to Game Object here at the top. I'm going to go down to 3D Object, 3D, and I'm going to click Cube. Okay? Now when I do that, it's going to build a cube that sits in my scene. And I can move that cube around with the little handles wherever I need to within my scene, right? There's my little cube right there. So the move tool does exactly that, right? Lets us move in any direction we need to. We can also use the little planes here to also move it. If I just want to move it on the Z plane, I can go here, move it on that. I can move it on the X, and I can move it on the Y, right? Okay. Below the move tool is the rotate tool. Rotate's very similar. With my cube selected, I click rotate, and I can rotate the cube on any axes, right? These little handles. By any amount of degrees I need to, right? Okay. Below that, you'll see our scale tool, which allows us to scale an object in any direction, right? Scale it bigger, smaller, all that stuff. Go back to rotate, rotate it around, all right, move it, etc. All right. And then below scale, we have what's called a rect tool. And what that does is lets us scale in a specific direction. Okay, so we can grab any one of these like side handles and move an element in a particular direction, right? Make it bigger, smaller, all that stuff, all right? So we've got move, rotate, scale, and rectangular scale, right? So we can scale it in a particular direction, okay? Okay. Now, that's kind of like the bare bones of the scene view, but one thing I want to point out is with this cube selected in my scene, you'll notice that when I click on my cube, the handles are, I've done some rotations and things like that, and it's kind of misaligned from the angle of the cube, right? It's just kind of using what are called the world coordinates. It's using the world coordinates to move this cube around, which is great if you're placing elements in a level, right? But sometimes you want to move on the angle that you've rotated something on, right? So like this cube, for example, I want to rotate it at that same, or I want to move it at that same angle. And to do that, what you can do is at the top of your scene view here, we have this little center and global, right? If I change center to pivot, and I change global to local, it'll use the local rotation of that object to move whatever I need to. So now I can move it along the angle of however I've rotated. So if I rotate this object in some crazy way, right, I can now move it in that crazy way. It's using the local coordinates of the object. If I change it to global, it goes back to the global standard handles, right? So like our camera there, right, it's using standardized global, right? This cube, it's global right now, but if I change it to local, you'll see that the handles change. And that's great for, you know, if you have a car, right, or a ship, and you want to make sure that the Z is always the forward on that thing, right? And you want to make sure that it's rotating and it's always following that Z, right? And so you can kind of really animate and understand where it's going, right? So that's why you're going to use the difference between global and local. So global is like everything, right? Local is the object you have selected, okay? And you can use both, which makes it super easy, right? Sometimes you want to angle something a certain way, but then you want to go to global and just have it that same way and use it over, right? Okay, so that's like very high level basics of like what's in the scene view, right? Next to the scene view here, you might notice this hierarchy. This shows everything that's in our scene, right? So right now we only have 4 objects in there. I've got a camera, a light, a volume, which is more for rendering, and a cube, right? These 4 elements in the scene, right? As we build more stuff in the scene, if I were to click on my cube and say Control-C, Control-V, like copy-paste, right? You'll see I now have another cube in my scene, right? You can also select those cubes and say, hey, Control-D, duplicate, and we've got more cubes, right? But you'll see as I add stuff in my scene, it shows up in the hierarchy. You can envision this hierarchy as just like all the stuff that's in your scene, right here, in the sample scene, right? Everything that's here is in here. If I select it all, right? I can also select items in here or in here. I can click on them, or I can select them in the hierarchy, right? Kind of like your layers in Photoshop, right? This is just everything that's in your scene. Not really layers though, just like a bunch of objects that sit in your scene. You can also organize your objects any way you like in the hierarchy, and they won't affect what you see in the scene. So if I'm like, you know what, I want these cubes to be at the very top of my scene, I can move them up, right? Or I want the camera to be at the bottom, I can move it down, right? You can organize it however you want. Just makes it super easy, right? Okay, now to the right of our scene view over here is what's called the inspector. If I click on one of my cubes, you're going to notice that we've got all of this information about this cube on the side right here, okay? And to break this down, what we're looking at, Unity is object-based. So every single thing in the engine is essentially an object, right? The engine is conducting or coordinating what happens with those objects, right? So when we build a game, our character is an object. The projectile he throws is an object. The platform he jumps on is an object. They're all game objects, right? That's why we have a menu at the top called Game Object, and there's all kinds of stuff you can make in the game object. Everything from effects to audio to 2D objects, 3D objects, everything. They're all game objects, right? They're just different kinds of game objects, right? So what makes this cube a cube is what's below the game object properties. So by default, every game object, whether it's your camera, your volume, whatever it is, you're going to notice we have what's called a transform setting right here at the very top of the object. And all that does is tell you where the coordinates are of that object in your scene, right? So this cube, right, the position on the X, Y, and Z right here on this grid is at -2, 5, 7, 4, 3, 3, and 12, 12, right? If I want to zero that out, I can just click these, zero it out, and now it's at the center of my scene, right? If I wanted my camera to be at the center of my scene, I could just click on it and say, hey, you know what, let's put this at the center, 0, 0, 0 of my scene, right? You see that the global volume that's in there is already set at the center, right? And that's really great to have control of those transforms just so you know where everything's at. Sometimes you might have something that's like really far, let me just like put this really far out here, and you don't realize it, and you're like, man, why is that object so freaking small? Like, what's up with that, right? Oh, it's because it's at freaking negative 270, right? Or it's at negative 150, right? Well, to bring it back, I can just zero it out, and boom, there it is, right? So transform is really important, just knowing where everything is. As I move things around, you can see that those transform values change, right? Below the positional changes, we have our rotation, right? If I wanted to bring this back to its normal rotation, I could also just zero those out. Boom, it's back, right? Multiple at once. I could take all these, I could say, you know what, let's zero those out, right? So you can work on those transform settings just to kind of know where everything is in your scene. We also have our scale value, right? I've done some scaling on this object, right? You'll see as I adjust those scale values, you'll see that the scale values change, right? So as I make it bigger, you see those numbers getting bigger, right? As I make it smaller, those numbers are getting smaller, right? They're never going to go below 0, right? But if you make it 1, that's a standard value of that object. So anything that we want as like a standardized unit object is going to be a scale of 1, okay? And this grid in Unity is represented by meters in real life. So I know it's kind of crazy, but if we look at each one of these squares we see here, imagine those are meters in real life, right? So meters, meters, meters. So everything that's done in Unity is done with meters. Meters is like a unit of 1 in the grid in Unity. Okay, so just so you're wondering, like, if you ever bring stuff in and out of Unity, if you're building something in a 3D program and you need to make sure it looks good in Unity, well, think about that object in meters and how big or small you'd have to make it to show up on the grid in Unity. Okay? Now, when we're dealing with characters and environments and all that kind of fun stuff, a character in Unity is represented by a unit of 1 meter by 1 meter. Okay? Which seems like super huge in like real life, right? But in the game engine, that's how it works. Okay? So imagine a character is usually like 1 meter by 1 meter by 2 meters high or something like that, right? That's how its physics engine works. It works in meters. Okay? Okay, so if we look at the inspector on the side, so we know what the transform settings are at the top, right? And every object has those, right? We know where it's at in the world, what its rotation is, and what its scale is, right? Below the transform settings, and every object in Unity, whatever you make that sits in your scene, will always have transform settings. A lot of times, we'll have scripts that sit in our scene that are attached to empty game objects that do nothing in the scene, but just run a script, right? Those will have coordinates as well. A lot of times, I'll even set coordinates for those empty game objects just to sit somewhere in my scene, and like so it's not interfering with the level or something, right? And you can do that by like this. If I go game object here and just say create empty, right? I can make empty objects that have nothing in them, but just a location, right? So like this empty object sits at 0, 0, 0, right? Right there, empty object, right? But what's cool about empty objects is you can attach things like, level loops, things that talk to, think of them as like conductor objects that sit in your level, right? Or they can hold other objects. You can have an empty object that has a bunch of other objects in it. If I wanted to take these cubes here, right, and throw them into an empty object, I could just drag them into that, and now boom, that empty object holds all those cubes, right? So they're kind of used for a variety of purposes. More than likely, I use them to hold things and run scripts, right? Game objects, okay? You can have empty, you can have game objects that have parameters attached that make them something like these cubes. These are game objects, but what makes them a cube? Well, we've got a cube mesh filter, so it has a mesh attached to it. It has a renderer for the mesh attached to that, which tells it like it has a material, it interacts with probes and lighting and stuff like that. And then below the mesh renderer, we have a collider. So it also has some physical identification. It says, hey, this cube not only is a cube, can be rendered as a cube, but it can also be interacted with as a cube, right? And every 3D object in an engine works exactly the same way, right? It has location data, it has data that tells it what it is, like it's a mesh, and then it has some type of collider property that says, is it a mesh collider, is it a box collider, is it a sphere collider, whatever, right? So that's what your inspector is essentially used for. It's for looking at the properties for anything you bring into the level, right? And from like a super high level, right now, looking down, this is like the basic stuff that's in there, right? Just kind of like location and render data for what these objects are, right? We can create custom parameters with scripts to add more to these objects, right? And those would be represented by what are called components, okay? So these components here are things that you would write with scripts and attach to objects to make them do stuff, right? So if I had a game loop, a game manager in the game I'm making, and I wanted it to do stuff when the level started, I'd probably have a game object in my scene that I'd call like game manager. Whoops, if I can spell there, hold on, let's see. Game manager, and that would have a component script attached to it. That's something that I would write that would control things like the score and the health and the timer and all the stuff in my game from this one game object, right? And you can have all kinds of game objects doing all kinds of stuff in your game. And it's really kind of up to you how you want to set that up, but I'll show you like a good kind of tried and true way to get games going when we start making them, right? But just know that you can use game objects for everything. And everything we build in Unity is just comprised of game objects. They're just game objects that do different stuff. Like this game object is a light. And what makes that a light? Well, the components that are attached to it, right? We have a light component attached to this object which has all these light properties. And these are things we can change. We can change like, do we want it like a colored light? Do we want to give it a certain color to it, right? We can do all that, right? Just by the properties. So cubes have like mesh properties. A light has like light properties, right? Camera has camera properties, right? We've got camera component, right? And then our volume, this is more rendering properties, like telling the engine how to render the game, or specifically the camera. Do you want to have like lens dirt, tents, and all kinds of stuff on there, right? That's what that global volume does, right? Now, typically, whenever I'm setting up any level or game or anything, I'll have my core components like my camera, my volume, and my manager always at the top, right? And then all the other stuff that makes up the level below that, okay? So you want to have like your core stuff up there, right? And then everything else below it. But that's also up to you, however you want to do it. Like, it's pretty flexible. You don't have to do it that way. Okay, so we kind of know like what's in the level and how we can adjust the different elements that are in the level, right? And this is just like basic stuff right now. We're not doing anything crazy, but we'll get into how we can use the inspector to actually do some stuff here in a second. Down below, this little area right here is essentially the folder structure for our game, okay? And everything we do in any project we make is very folder specific within Unity. And the way it works is it's a 1-to-1 ratio with the game project folder structure that it created when you set up Unity. So for me, I'm just going to minimize this real quick so you can see. When I started this game, I called it My Test 3D on my desktop. You can see it made a folder on my desktop called My Test 3D. And in here, it has assets and all these other folders, library, logs, etc., right? Everything we do for our Unity game is going to be in the assets folder right here under assets. Inside of Unity, you'll see by default, it's set to assets right here. This folder right here, what we see in here, is exactly what we see in the assets folder right here for our project. So My Test 3D assets, by going to Unity, this assets folder here, this is the same. We see in here, we've got scene settings tutorial, and here we've got scene settings tutorial. If I right click in here, somewhere in here, and I say create folder, I call it, I don't know, models, right? Once I create that folder, if I go back into the folder for the game, you'll see that, oh, I've got a models folder now, right? If I make a folder in this thing, and I go, you know what, I'm gonna make a folder in here, and I'm gonna call it sounds. When I go back to Unity, you'll see now I've got a sounds folder. So it's a 1-to-1 reflection of the assets folder that's in here. Now all these extra files that it's generating are instruction files that tell the engine what to do. They're called meta files, right? So these files are more like instructions for the file system to tell the engine what's going on. So anytime I make something, if I make another one, I'll go create VFX, right? Right? If I go back to my file structure, you'll see we've now got a VFX folder and a meta file for that, right? So 1-to-1 relationship with that assets folder. All these other folders in your project, library, logs, packages, etc., you're not going to be using those, right? You're going to be doing everything inside assets. These are all engine driven, so the engine handles all of these, while everything in our assets folder is user driven, right? That's all the stuff we see in here, right? All these folders, right? You'll see packages in here. There are packages. Every time we add new extensions to Unity, they're going to show up in packages, but we're not going to be editing those. We're going to be doing everything in assets, okay? Now the one rule with anything we create in Unity is never make a folder called assets and put it in assets, okay? So in here, don't make a folder called assets and put that in there, right? I'm not going to do that because what that does is it becomes like recursive, and then that now becomes the new assets folder and it disregards all your other ones. So it just makes it kind of difficult as you go forward. So just a heads up on that, okay? It's like the only rule, right? Other than that, everything else you don't want to touch, you just want to stay in assets. So remember, it's folder specific, everything stays within assets. Pretty easy, right? Cool. Now you can organize and move things around inside assets folder however you want, right? You can move files from different locations, you can set them up in the game, and it never loses its linking in the game. So as we start building stuff, if we make custom scripts, things like that, we can organize the project inside however we want, and it keeps all the same hookups and everything we do, which is really cool. Okay, so now let's actually do something in the engine, right? So we've got this great, 3D engine we can do stuff with, but now let's try to do something at least somewhat cool before we leave today, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to delete these cubes I have in here, and I'm going to start over. I'm going to say game object, 3D object, cube, okay? And this cube, I'm going to change its name to ground, and I'm going to make this the ground for a little simulation I'm going to build just to show you kind of how to set up things in Unity. Okay? So that cube, I'm calling it ground, and in its scale settings on the X and the Z, I'm going to make that like 50 on the X and 50 on the Z. Okay? So I got a big ground. Now the only reason that's looking green on my end is because I changed the light color to something different. You can change that to whatever you want, right? Make it white, whatever. I think I grabbed that light and I changed it to color instead of filter. And I just changed the color. So if you're wondering like why it's like that, I'll put it back. Okay. So I've got my ground, right? The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go game object, 3D object, and I'm going to go sphere. I'm going to make a sphere. Okay. Once I have my sphere, I'm going to drag it up above the ground. Just kind of put it like right there. Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. Maybe I'll increase the scale a little bit. Okay. All right, so I've got my ground and I've got my sphere. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell Unity that I want this sphere to be a physical object that actually interacts with the environment. And the way we can test this in Unity is first, I'm going to click on my camera right here in Unity, and I'm going to move my camera so I can see what the camera is looking at. You'll look at this little toolbar at the bottom. You might have camera unchecked. If I click that on, it'll show a preview of what my camera is looking at, right? So I'm going to position my camera so I'm looking at the ground and this sphere, right? It's like right there is this little icon at the bottom. Turn it on, off like that. All right, I think I've got navigation on. I can turn that off. Turn that navigation one off, turn camera on right here. And this will let me kind of position my camera so I can move it and see what the camera sees, right? So I'm just going to kind of align my camera so it's looking at this sphere in my scene, okay? Now, two ways to look at that. You can use this little camera preview down here at the bottom. You can also click on the Game tab at the top of where the Scene tab is. See how it says Game right next to it? If I click that, you're going to see the view of the camera and our sphere floating above our ground, right? So I go Scene View, Game View. Game View will always show what the camera is looking at. This right here, that's what it's looking at. You can also see that preview right in here. Right? Okay, so if I wanted to test my game in Unity and say I'm like, this is perfect. I want to make this, I want to run this game. I want to see what it's like. All you have to do is click the play button at the very top. So see how I have these three buttons at the very top of Unity? If I click play, it'll run whatever app you're building, right? Whatever you're building in Unity, it'll run it. So I click play, you'll see it's going to switch to my game view, and it's going to show what my camera sees, which is right now, nothing's happening. It's just looking at a sphere, right? Now, you might wonder why my Unity changed colors, and yours might change colors. If not, just be cognizant. The only reason I did that is so I know that I'm in play mode. We'll get into that a little bit later. But to exit out of play mode, just hit the stop button, and you're good to go. So it goes back to this view. Okay? Not pause, just stop. Just hit play, and then when you're done looking at it, go ahead and hit stop and bring it back to play. Okay? All right. So right now this sphere doesn't do anything because all it is a sphere in 3D space, right? It doesn't have any instructions. It doesn't know that it has physics. It doesn't know that it can fall, that there's gravity, or any of that stuff. We have to tell that sphere what it is in order to interact with the environment, okay? And what's really cool about Unity is it has a built-in physics engine running behind the scenes that we can apply to any object in our scene, right? We can literally tell that sphere, hey, you're a physical object. You can actually like fall and interact with gravity and do stuff. But the way we do that is by adding a component to our object in our scene. right? So if we click on this sphere, right now, talked about a couple of different things, right? Where it exists, the transform settings, and then all these components that make up what the sphere is, right? The mesh, the renderer, and the collider, right? Collider is great because it tells, okay, that gives us a boundary. So the engine knows that, okay, it does have some type of collision property to it, right? But we need to tell this engine that that is an actual physical object that will fall and interact with gravity. And the way we do that is by clicking the Add Component button. After you click your sphere, at the very bottom, click Add Component, and it's going to bring up this little window that says, you know, it's like a library search, right? And for anything physical that moves in Unity, we're going to use what's called a rigid body, okay? And you'll see when I type rigid body, it brings up two things. It says rigid body and rigid body 2D. I'm going to click rigid body because we're in 3D. Once you do that, it adds the rigid body component to our sphere. And what the rigid body is it's essentially instructions for the physics engine to let the engine know that, hey, this has mass and weight and can interact with the environment, right? So now, when I hit play, my sphere falls down, right? Super awesome, right? We've literally added gravity to our level, okay? We've told this sphere that, hey, you can be affected by gravity. But what's the problem, right? So when I play my game, what happens to my sphere? It just literally hits the ground and does nothing, right? It just sits there because a couple of reasons. One, it's a perfect sphere, right? The sphere is actually perfect and it has a certain amount of weight, but it doesn't know the surface that it's hitting, right? It doesn't know that, is this surface, does it have a bounciness to it? Is the surface angled a little bit? You know, what's going on with the surface that's affecting the sphere? Also, what's up with the surface of the sphere itself? Like, what can the sphere do, right? We know it can fall. It's an object that can fall and hit another object, but like, what kind of variables does it do? Is it bouncy? Is it lightweight? Like, what can it do, right? So, for simple testing, we can just take our ground and we can just slightly angle it a little bit, like that. And when I say play, we should see the sphere fall, and then, oh, okay, now we're getting somewhere, right? Because now we're not perfectly level, right? So that sphere is gonna fall and roll off the edge of your ground, right? But it's also kind of like a dead weight, right? It just falls, and that's pretty much it, right? If I were to click on my sphere and Control D to duplicate, and just move this one over to the side, I could probably get a little extra physical interaction when both of these spheres fall. Let's see what happens. Okay, but not super fun, not super great, right? I get 2 balls that fall, right? If I wanted to, you know, enhance that even more, I could duplicate again, do some fun stuff. But what we want to do is we want to change the actual surface of these objects to give the physics engine a little more instructions like, hey, okay, we know that we can fall, we know that there's gravity, we know that there's colliders, but now like let's deal with the actual surfaces themselves, right? So like the ground, right? Let's tell the ground that, hey, you know what? You actually have physics. You're not like, you can have things like reflect off of you, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my ground, and down in my little file structure down here, I'm going to make a folder. I'm going to click on Assets right here, and I'm going to make a folder. I'm just doing this for organization purposes, but this one's going to be called Materials. Okay? And then I'm going to double click and go into my Materials folder. And I just did that to organize my project. Like, you don't have to do that, but I'm going to do it. In here, I'm going to right click this empty space. I'm going to go up to Create, and then in here, I'm going to look for Physics Material, which is at the very bottom right here. Okay? And there's different materials that we can make in Unity. We're going to start with physics materials, but then you can get into other materials like colors and textures and all that kind of stuff too. So there's physics materials, and then there's like visual materials, right? We're going to start with physics just because we want to make cool stuff happen, right? So with this physics material, I'm just going to rename it, and I'm going to call it bouncy. Bouncy. And on my ground that I have here, under the box collider settings of my ground, so in the inspector here, if I go down to box collider, you'll see we have material right here, and it says none, quote, physics material, right? I'm going to take bouncy, and I'm going to drag it into that little slot right there. Okay, so I've associated that, hey, now this collider has this bouncy material. Now I'm going to adjust the bouncy material itself, right? I'm going to click on bouncy just by itself after I've associated with it, and I'm going to change the bounciness to 1. So it's like a fully bouncy object, right? So now when I play my game and my ball falls, boom, hey, okay, the ball actually kind of bounces a little bit, right? Can actually like reflect off of that, right? We can also take bouncy. We can click on our sphere. I go down to the sphere collider, and under its material, under sphere collider, I can also add that same bouncy to that as well. We can double it up, right? So now when it falls, it's like 2 bouncy objects hitting off each other, right? So you go boom, right? Boom, look at that, boom, right? So I can like reuse the same physics material on 2 separate objects, right? One's falling and one's just bouncing, right? So now that we have that all set up, we're going to get into what's called a prefab, okay? Now, a sphere's cool, but like, remember like those like jacks you'd throw like back in the day, like back in the 80s, like jacks you'd throw, right? You throw a ball at them and all that kind of stuff, right? We're going to turn that into one of those. So instead of a sphere, I'm going to make it a little more interesting. Let's change the object a little bit so it's a little more interesting. So on my sphere object, I have it selected. I'm going to go game object. I'm going to go 3D object, and I'm going to go cube. Okay? I'll make this new cube. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale the cube out a little bit and make it like a long rectangle. Right? Like that. Okay? Now once I've created that little long rectangle cube, I'm then going to parent it inside the sphere. Okay, so my sphere now controls both the cube and this little child object of the cube, right? The sphere has itself and it has the little cube inside of it. I just dropped it inside of it, right? You can see it now has a cube inside of it, right? Now because the cube sits inside the sphere, when we zero out its like position, it's going to go right to the center of the cube because it's inside the world of the cube, or of the sphere, right? So I can come to that cube and say, hey, let's go 0, 0, 0, and boom, there it is inside my sphere, right? Now once it's in there, I can kind of adjust its size a little bit and make it something like that. Now I'm going to duplicate, Control D. I'm going to duplicate that and just kind of make like a couple extra ones inside here. And maybe like another one, like a little, like, I don't know, atomic structure or something, right? So I've got a sphere with all these little cubes inside of it, right? Okay, so now when I raise this guy up and we let it fall, let's see what happens. Boom. We've got this like interesting kind of bouncy structure, right? Now, what's cool is this is a custom object now, right? Because we've got a sphere and we've got all these like sub-objects that are inside of it. But, you know, normally we could just duplicate this a bunch of times in our scene and that's totally fine. You could sit there and go Control D, right? Control D, make a bunch of these, right? And we could watch them all fall, right? But what's really great about Unity is we can make what's called a prefab in our scene that is essentially like an instance of these objects that we can reuse at any time. Because we've done a lot of work to this project, or to this object, right? we've got a sphere, it's got a bouncy property, it's got these little cubes connected to it, right? It's like a custom thing, right? And let's say I want to reuse it at some point in my game, right? But maybe not now, but maybe right now, but some point in my game, right? So instead of copying and pasting that object a bunch of times, we can make a reference to that object, which is called a prefab. And prefabs are everything in Unity, okay? They really speed up your workflow. So how we do that is down in my assets root right here, I'm going to make another folder, and I'm going to call it prefabs. And I'm just doing that for organization because organization's key. And then I'm going to open prefabs, right? Now, my sphere and my scene, I'm going to call it something cool like custom jazz. I don't know, what do you call that thing? Like a custom, what am I going to call this? I don't know, spiky thing. I'm going to call it custom spiky thing, right? That's that sphere thing, right? I'm now going to drag this parent object down into my prefabs folder, and boom, it's going to make this object in here, which is a prefab. And you'll notice as soon as I did that, it made this blue, right? It turned this object blue and it's filled in. What this does is this lets Unity know that, hey, we have a library reference to this object now that we can reuse. So if I want to put this object in my scene again, all I have to do is drag it, almost like a palette into my scene. I can just drag it from here into my scene. I can just start dragging these objects in, right? And they're already set up and ready to go, right? So I can just literally go to each one of these, put them where they need to be, etc., right? I can use my prefab instead of copying and pasting. And the reason you want to do that, there's a very specific reason for that. Does anybody know why you'd want to make this a prefab? Anybody? The reason why you'd want to make this a prefab is because you see that after I made this a prefab, it now has all these little arrows next to each one of these objects right here, right? If I go ahead and click that arrow, it brings me into the prefab structure for this object. So I'm now inside of custom spiky thing. And in here, let's say, you know what, on one of these little cubes that I made, I'm going to add another sphere in there. I can go game object, 3D object, sphere, right? And we'll zero this out real quick so it's where it needs to be. And I'm going to put it right on the tip right here so we've got like this extra little circle bit. And then I'm going to go back to my game, and then boom, every single one of them now has that. Okay? So it makes it real easy to update on the fly. For example, if you were building a level and you had lanterns all in your level, right? And they're really cool lanterns, but you want to make sure that every lantern looks the same because they should all look the same, right? Well, if you make a prefab and you place them all on the level, you can go back and any adjustments you make, every single lantern will get the same adjustments. The same fire, the same whatever you put in there, all that stuff, right? So now when I play my game, we can see what physics does, right? We've got all these fun things that fall and bounce around and do all this crazy stuff, right? And feel free to get real crazy. I can now take all these prefabs, right? I can duplicate those, right? I can bring those up, right? Duplicate some more, bring those up, duplicate some more, bring those up, right? And maybe I'll back my camera out a little bit so we can see the craziness unfold. And we'll say play, and we can watch all the craziness happen, right? All the fun stuff, right? So from like a super high level, like it's pretty fun. You can do some like really cool, interesting stuff inside Unity. And also, I talked a little bit about materials. Let's say that, you know, this is great, but man, that center sphere really needs to be red, right? The rest of the stuff, like, man, it maybe needs to have some other colors. Well, in my materials folder, I can make a new material, create material, and I'll call it red, right? And on its settings, you'll notice it's a little different because what materials are their settings files for your objects, right? So this is like a visual setting, right? So I can go in here, go to its base map, change that to like red, I can go into one of these prefabs and then say, hey, you know what? That center sphere, right? That's going to be red. This one's going to be red as well. Go back to the level, and then boom, they've all got it, right? So as you start building, prefabs become super powerful to get stuff done a certain way, right? So kind of fun, right? A little bit different, a little bit fun, right? And if you want to get crazy and you want to, do the same stuff with other stuff, all you have to do, let's say you want to make other objects in here, we can just go to game object, 3D object, we'll make let's see, a cylinder, right? Let's make a cylinder. Let's put this at 0, 0, 0. All right. Put this up here, I'll put it over here. I'll make the cylinder red. If I want the cylinder to fall, same thing. Add a component, rigid body, boom, it's now gonna fall, right? This will totally mess everything up, right? We can come here, and maybe we'll put this above, so after all the chaos, the cylinder will hit everything, right? So we can have all these elements fall down, and boom, we've got our little cylinder, right? Do some fun stuff, right? So that is kind of like the Unity engine from a super high level, nutshell, basic way to use it. Some general physics, how to set up some prefabs, how to put some objects in your scene. This is kind of like the super high level version, right? Now, when we make games, and next week when we get into our 2D game, even though it's a 3D engine, right? You're gonna notice in this view here that there's this little 2D view, right? 2D, like that, right? You can instantly change a 3D project to a 2D project. It's literally built in to the engine, right? We'll get into that next week and how to do that, and we'll do things like changing the camera so it's more of a orthographic camera and dealing with like textures and layers and all that fun stuff. But behind the scenes, it's all the same stuff. It's creating capsule colliders that are maybe locked and have a texture attached to them. It's creating things that have jump scripts and all that kind of stuff. It's all just components that we're writing and attaching to objects, and then having other objects kind of conduct what those objects are doing, right? Now, just to show you something super fun and different to add to this, let's say I wanted to make an explosion script that, hey, I'm gonna attach it to a game object, and then after like 2 seconds, anything that's in my scene, I want it to shoot all those rigid bodies in all kinds of directions, right? Well, if you want to do something like that, we can come to Google Gemini, and in here, it's as easy as, I would like to make a timer explosion script that propels my rigid body game objects in different directions after a set timer in Unity. And then it's going to go, okay. It's going to tell you, like, here's the script and what you want to make, but here's the script for you. Just take that code, put it in Unity, right? I'm going to copy this code right here. It's called timed explosion. I'm going to go into Unity. I'm going to make a new folder that I'm going to call scripts. In here, scripts. We go into scripts. I'm going to right click in here, and I'm going to go create mono behavior script. This guy right here. I think the name was timer explosion. I think that's what it's called. And then I'm going to double click on that script after it brings it in. It's going to open up Visual Studio. And then in here, we're just going to paste over everything that's in there, everything that it gave us. Oh, it's timed explosion. And then I save that. And And you want to make sure that your script is exactly what that's called. So I'm going to call this timed explosion. Let's go here real quick. Call that timed explosion. And talked about empty game objects, right? So I'm going to go game object, create empty. We'll call it exploder. Okay. I'm going to put this at the 0, 0 part of my scene. Maybe up a little bit right there. Let's add our timed explosion to exploder. And then what do we have in here? Okay, we've got a delay, 3 seconds, radius 5, force 700, upward modifier, so it's going to kind of explode up, right? Looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and hit play. Let's make that like for 5 seconds. Let's just see. And we're going to say play. We'll see what this does. Is it going to work? Did it work? No, it didn't do anything. What? Oh man, that's not fun. Wait a minute. Is it going to blow up? No, nothing happened. What the heck? All right, let's see. Exploder. Upward modifier, script, delay. Oh, what's going on here? Oh, radius. I think we need to make the radius bigger. Let's see. What's up here? Let's make that radius huge. Let's see. Let's go play. Come on, Explorer. Work. Let's see. These are falling. And it did nothing. Okay, awesome. Well, actually, I think it did something. Hold on. Let's see. Is that... It doesn't seem like it was doing anything. Let's see. Let's make this like 1,000. Or let's make it like 2,000. Let's see, is it doing anything? Where's 5? Let's hit play. Let's see. The joys of scripting. Oh yeah, it did blow it. Okay, it did do it. It did do it. There we go. Okay. It just wasn't big enough. Here, we'll go in here. We'll make this like 5,000. There we go. All right, so let it play. Let's go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, boom, there you go. There you go, right? So you can do some cool stuff, right? So, and that's as simple as literally just going in and writing a simple script in Gemini, having it write it real quick and then just bringing it in, right? It even tells you like what it's doing. It gives you all the things on what's happening in the script, right? All the directions and inline kind of things on what it's doing. So pretty interesting, pretty cool. We'll be doing a lot of that with Gemini to make sure that happens, but you think about it, right? You can trigger sounds, you can have objects trigger other objects, you can have, you know, characters spawn, enemies spawn, like whatever. We can create scripts that do whatever you want, right? So anyways, that's it for tonight. Obviously, it's the first night. We're just gonna dive in. What I'm gonna be doing every week is kind of doing some like tutorial follow along videos. For our game project specifically, I will be doing a series of videos and building the project, and then I'll give you guys the actual template of the project. So not only will you have all the scripts, and I'll show you how I kind of did my workflow and built it, but you'll have the core project too that you can customize, and then I'll show you videos on how we customize those projects. So for our first project next week, I've already got a really good 2D template I made, but I'll kind of show you some videos on how I got to that spot and how I built this 2D template. And then what we'll do is we'll start customizing it. We'll put our hero character in, projectiles, you know, level sprites, all that kind of stuff, how we set up a 2D project, all that kind of fun stuff. And just week by week, we'll kind of work on our own versions of the game and then get you guys to a point where you're not only taking what we built, but then you're customizing it. You're building your own scripts and putting them in, and even using AI to do that, right? Like, oh, you know what, this character, like, maybe he needs like a jetpack, or maybe he needs like this, so we're gonna write a jetpack script. We're gonna throw it on our character and have that work, and all that kind of fun stuff. And then we'll get into stuff like controller mapping, how to map controllers, how to assign, you know, different actions to different buttons, all that kind of fun stuff. And so the goal is, hey, when you get out of here, like, you're gonna have some pretty cool little projects for your portfolio to show off, and it's killer for jobs these days. I mean, companies are looking for people who are jack of all trades creatives, right? It used to be that you could go get a job as like a graphic designer or an animator or a specific kind of skill set, right? But nowadays, with AI and all these tools that are available, they want somebody who can do it all. right? So why not be that person? Why not be killer and have a wheelhouse full of crazy abilities, right? And that's my job. That's what I'll help you do, right? It's gonna be fun. We're gonna make some kick-ass stuff. I'm super excited. I'm so glad you guys are here. This class is gonna be fun. It's gonna be rad. We'll be, every time we come in here, it's gonna be like a work session, and we'll just make cool stuff. And I'll help you with it. I'll be here to kind of, if you get stuck on something, whatever it is, like don't get stressed. I'll show you like how to troubleshoot and how to do it right. Okay, so we'll be doing some cool stuff. So sound good? Are we like, yes, this class is rad. I love it. We made cool physics stuff fall and explode. So, anyways, next week, we'll get into the 2D mode. This was just kind of like a high level, like what is Unity? Next week, it's 2D all the way. We'll probably stay on our 2-week project or our 2D project for like 4 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, and then we'll get into first person after that. I think we're 16 weeks, right? So yeah, I think that's pretty good timing, something like that. So start thinking about, I would say between now and next class, I'll have some videos posted by Monday for you guys. I'll be posting throughout the week, but think about the type of sprite character that you want to make. So just a heads up, so on your computers, you should have a sprite. So if you type in down in the bottom, if you go ASE sprite right here, you should have this app. Super easy app. You can find it online. I think it's like $12. But it's a great app to help you do like pixel art, right? So I can go in here and say, you know what, I'm going to make a 45 pixel by 45 pixel character. Say okay, and it lets you just kind of like easily paint like cool, fun characters, right? So we'll be using this app to kind of design our characters. So in the meantime, if you wanna get a sprite, I have it. If you want me to send it to you, or if you just want to get it online, whatever way, or you can come in here and use it. You can build your little sprite characters and all that kind of stuff, and we'll use those characters in the games that we make. So you have like your own custom characters and all that kind of stuff. I'll tell you like the sprite sizes and whatever. So you can either work on sprites, animations, any of that stuff. For what we're doing in the game, okay? So pretty fun. I love this app. I use it all the time for like the pixelated retro stuff. It's killer. And I think it's really cool when you have like a pixel art game in your portfolio. Like people are like, whoa! Like in addition to all your 3D stuff we're going to be doing, it's rad. You guys will love it. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. We'll continue up again next week. Look out in Canvas for videos. And then we'll kind of go from there. Okay, I'm thinking what I'll do because this, the way it's structured, it's a little weird with the hybrid thing. We did cover a lot this week, but basically the lectures will be posted online. You just kind of go through those. I'm thinking like the first 45 minutes when we get here, I'll just kind of do a recap of everything and show you where all the videos are, and then it's just kind of work session, like working on cool stuff, and we'll have goals every week of things we want to accomplish. Like, all right, this week we're going to work on our level layouts. Let's build all the cool stuff for levels and have our levels do cool stuff like have elevators and jump pads and all that fun stuff, right? We'll do that kind of stuff. So it'll be rad. Okay? Cool. All right, that's it for tonight. I don't want to keep you guys long. It's the first night. I know how it is. Week one, getting organized and all that stuff. But hopefully you guys enjoyed. Did I give ad codes to everybody who needed it? We all good with that? Think so? Cool? All right, sweet. If you have any questions, email me. I'll update my office hours. Typically, the best times to reach me are Monday afternoons and Tuesday mornings. I'll be here Tuesday mornings and Monday afternoons, and then a little bit on Fridays too. And then if you're in film, I'm also teaching film production on Wednesdays and Fridays down in the film department. So if you need to find me, I'm usually there. Okay? Have a great evening, everybody. Enjoy.
What time is the school?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So we will have some lab time in here open. I'll give you guys an updated. I gotta find somebody to sit in here. I'll give you the updated schedule this week. I'll post it on campus.
Another question is that I know there's the remote desktop access. We have Unity. Is that all we need for the course project, or?
Yeah, that's all you need right now is Unity.
Around here, if we don't have, if the remote desktop access is not totally sufficient.
Yeah, I would say remote access is not the best way to do it. I would say, you know, work on a project at home or here. I'll give you lab hours for when it's open here though. So if you need to work on it, yeah. And most of the stuff we'll be able to do while we're here in class. So don't stress too much about, you know, homework and stuff like that.
All right.
All right, guys.
Love you.